Hi, Nelson. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Hey, my name's Nelson Leiser. I'm the director of talent acquisition with the Midwest business unit in Bluegreen Vacations. Actually, this month is 26 years for me in talent acquisition. I started in the agency world, did that for about the first 9 years, and then worked on the corporate side ever since then. I've done on the corporate side, a majority has been sales recruitment, leading teams for that. I did have a short stint in the healthcare industry, worked 3.5 years for East Tennessee's largest healthcare system and helped pull them out of a crisis before I joined Bluegreen 4 years ago this month.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, congratulations on your 4-year anniversary.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Right in time for the holidays.
Absolutely. Love it. It's a great way to end the year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting that you took a little foray into healthcare, given that you were in hospitality again before you were at COVID and you were at the Wyndham. And as somebody who's done that myself, I'm curious, like, were there kind of like major differences in sort of like hiring practices between healthcare and hospitality? Or did you feel like there were a lot of like proxies for you to work with?
So, there are some similarities, in terms of just the overall, I guess, if you go to high level recruitment process, some things are, could go and be universal industry to industry. I'd say the major difference would be the focus really, when I went to Covenant, was hiring nurses. Now we hired everything, almost 3,000 employees, every role. But the biggest gap was nursing. And on that side of the world, there's nowhere near enough to go around. Of course, I mean, America's been in a nursing crisis for, 30 years. And so the candidate pool is very, very small. I guess on the plus side, there's only certain places you can find nurses. Now, if I change gears and go to hospitality, a lot of what we hired at Wyndham and hire at Bluegreen on the sales side can be anywhere from entry-level sales to folks that have experience. So that's a much, much, much broader net that you cast. That certainly each side has their own challenges for sure.
Totally. And I saw you were saying that like you're responsible for like, is it a Midwest region now of
yes.
Yeah, so obviously there's multiple like metro areas and multiple sort of like geographies. Do you see like differences in hiring your employees in all those different cities, or do you feel like there's a kind of similar kind of true for some, relevant for all for the city?
Boy, so we cover in the Midwest 5 different states, and it's everywhere from Nashville, Tennessee to Chicago. And in those 2 markets, while they're large metro areas, for us, they're very small currently. I'm talking like 10 to 15 sales staff is all, versus the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, most visited national park in America for 30 plus years. In this market, we've got, over 100 sales staff in a much, much, much smaller market. So you want to talk about varying by region? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Very much.
So you're not blanket like rolling out everywhere, kind of need its own sort of bespoke strategy effectively.
Yeah, for sure. You have to invest some time in each market and learn the nuances. And listen, there's no, I've never worked in a corporate recruiting role where hiring managers didn't matter. The best are when you have hiring managers that are just fully engaged in the process, are natural networkers, or at least curious about networking. And I even found that in healthcare. I mean, there were folks in healthcare that almost had a wait list of nurses to join them, and others could never get enough. And isn't that interesting? Right.
That is. My sister's actually a nurse, and she went to Australia because just like United States, obviously, they have such a shortage of nurses down there. And I guess they want a bit of an Irish brogue,
Sure. Go wherever you want, right? When you have that kind of skill set, for sure.
Totally. And so is it just the sale with the responsibility of the acquisition and talent for you is within like hiring sales managers for the resorts and hotels and all that kind of stuff? Or is it like the hourly hospitality staff that fills those spaces as well?
So we're a vacation ownership company.
Yeah.
So it's not on the hotel side. It's luxury.
Sorry, what I meant by
resort.
hotel was the kind of
Yeah.
more accommodation.
Yeah, it's okay. So our focus, we have a separate talent acquisition function that focuses on the resort staff hires, staff managers, et cetera. My team focuses on just sales and marketing operations. So when folks would come, families on vacation, and go through a preview, they meet with a sales agent, sales manager, director, vice president. We're filling those kinds of roles.
And tell me about the challenges to hiring them in sort of, like you said, like Nashville, Chicago are totally different, but they have their own unique challenges. Like what kind of roadblocks do you find in terms of finding that kind of sales and marketing talent?
So, couple of things. One, we're hospitality, so we're weekends, right? Yeah. We work weekends, we work holidays, we only close a couple days a year. So there is a lot of great sales talent out there that just doesn't want to make the shift from, an industry that's maybe a Monday through Friday type gig. So that can be somewhat of a challenge. I would say the bigger challenge is the job itself is just very difficult. It's one call close. You're selling a high-end product to folks while they're on vacation. Usually we don't like, as Americans, making major decisions while we're on vacation. And we're sort of asking them to do that, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of our business, really, for every company in this industry. So there's some uniqueness there. And I say that to say this: you can hire someone that does phenomenally well for a year or two, and then they just struggle because the rejection rate's pretty high. Again, you typically don't see the client again. It's not the kind of industry where if you have a client that they're your client for life necessarily, you may not see them again as they travel. So.
And so on that point about rejection, because it's quite interesting actually, how do you move people along or graduate people so that they don't get to that burnout phase? Presumably you look at that phase and you go, okay, we don't want our salespeople to be there. So what are sort of the kind of indicators you see that people are getting to that point?
Yeah. So I would say a lot of that is really recognized by the sales leadership. And I'll take the question and go a slightly different angle. In fact, I just had a candidate yesterday was asking me during an interview, tell me a little bit more about training. And I started with, well, here's what I'll say about training. If you're the type that is a lifelong learner, you'll love working for us. If you're not, then you're not going to like our training, because we're going to give you 1 week initial training with experts in our industry that were great in sales, but also incredible teachers. And so they're the only ones that kind of teach that, if you will, classroom training, right? Well, then we also have podcasts that we have deployed over the last couple of years. So they're on their smartphone driving into work, listening to experts within our company, as well as within our industry. And we've got this massive library, right? So I say that to say, we give them a lot of different resources to stay hungry, healthy, and happy. And our culture is very motivating. I don't like to miss morning sales meetings because even though I'm not the one presenting to the guests, although, never say never, I might do that someday because this business is really fun.
Join the club.
And I love travel. So you just never know, right? But the morning meetings are just very motivational. We have folks that are just great at delivering messages and getting everybody hyped up. So, I say we create an environment where it's awfully hard to get to the negative side and let the rejection wear you down. But sometimes folks just, after a while, it can take its toll.
Totally. I mean, candidly on my side, we have the same thing in the sense that we have we call them SDRs, and they're doing lots of the outbound calling and the emailing and the LinkedIning and all the things that go into finding people. And, it's how do we manage that sort of rejection? And part of it is, I would say, just from my own vantage point, a part of it is we can train people how to deal with all that kind of stuff, but at the same time there's a certain personality or je ne sais quoi to being able to dealing with a lot of rejection. Some people skin off the nose, other people it can kind of derail them for a bit and remotivate them back to kind of not being shy again in sales. It's interesting.
So the thing I was going to say about that, we say a lot internally as I travel to our different sales centers in the different states and invest some time there. It's not abnormal that I would either lead a sales meeting or one of the senior leaders would. And I've heard many, many, many times, but it is so true. 99% of success in sales is attitude, and the other 1% is attitude. I mean, if that's off, all the rest kind of falls apart. And, there's a ownership that I have to take, whether I'm the sales agent or the sales manager or director, that I've got to do everything I can to maintain mine, but also help you maintain yours.
Totally. And it's interesting that you lean into culture there. I feel I speak to a lot of your peers on this podcast.
Yeah.
Like so many. I mean, when this stuff is finally out there, this will be like, I gotta listen to that person in this resort or in this chain or in this franchise. So many. And one of the key things that I hear from people again and again and again is like the culture of the organization. And I'd love to hear your take on, creating that sort of successful, sort of like winning culture, because it's also interesting because, you're responsible for like hiring sales, which in and of itself is a hard place to kind of create a compatible culture with a large organization, given the incentive structure there is typically financial versus the incentive for everybody else is like good performance and good behavior and leads to potential promotion. So I'm curious how you think about culture in a sort of sales org that's kind of got its own sort of goals.
Sure, man, I love that. So I would say it all starts with our obsession toward the customer and, giving them excellent service, loving on them, providing a product that will take them on luxury trips and force them to travel and make memories. And I say that to say it's common in this industry to call a family that comes in a tour. We won't use that word. They're guests.
Yeah.
So we start with a framework that says, if you're used to saying tours because you worked for a competitor and we hired you, get that out of your vernacular. Everybody's a guest, right? So that framework, I say that to say that's kind of that's a fundamental starting point. We're so family oriented and people oriented, obviously fun oriented, because that's what we're talking about every day is cool trips and dream vacations and where do you really want to go? I mean, there's so much optimism and joy in that, that it really lends itself to head in the right direction. Now it requires maintenance, right? If I go off the rails, the team as a whole, not just the managers, but my coworkers have to kind of bring me back in and say, hey, Nelson, they're guests, right? Not everybody buys and, lift you up. And I mean, I would say as I travel throughout the company, that's one common theme is they are all guests. We love coming to work. We love what we do. We've got a passion for it. And that builds a fun culture.
Yeah, no, and it's cool because you're actually able to describe certain parts of it and articulate it. One of the things I find fascinating about talking to leaders and talent is it's, a different flavor in a different organization. It's like that phrase, it's hard to describe, but when you see it,
Sure.
Like, I feel like I could throw out so many phrases here to even describe how I'm thinking about culture, like, oh, it's everyone rowing in together behind the one person having a common objective. Right. But it sounds like, the North Star is the guest and starting as phrasing the person as a guest as opposed to like a tour or whatever sort of other word that people use. And I guess just like, how do you, especially in hospitality, because it's interesting because the salespeople don't necessarily work in hospitality and their job is to find people in the resort, like when they're already on the vacation and see if they're interested in like a larger purchase. That's what that's what I'm mentioning here. So it's actually quite delicate, because the balance is like, you don't want somebody to kind of be annoyed. Like you don't want to impact that sort of guest experience. So yes, people have to be very nuanced and they have to be very delicate, which is actually quite interesting because to have a successful woman, I would imagine they know exactly what that line is.
Sure. Listen, I mean, 1,000% or more, right? Folks don't buy in a high pressure situation, right? That's not really relational selling. And yes, it takes a very articulate, quick on your feet, genuine person to be able to not cross the line. And, on the other side of it is, if an individual does cross the line, the company, and we do this on a regular basis, has to pull folks back and or release them.
Yeah.
It's painful when you've got to let what has been an quote A player go from a production standpoint, but if the line's crossed, listen, they can't be on the team.
Totally. And I feel like, it's one of two things here. I feel like the evolution of sales behavior has kind of hit that where, quote unquote, like rock star. I say that in inverted commas now, just in case people are listening. Not that I subscribe to calling people rock stars,
Right.
But that sort of quote unquote rock star salesperson who has so much collateral damage associated to like hitting that number, I don't think is tolerated in really many work environments, irrespective of whether it's hospitality or it's software technology. I don't think that kind of, I think the culture equity almost is as valuable now. Obviously, it's just presented more valuably now in so many more organizations. To your point about like, just because you're the A player on like the board here doesn't mean you might be tolerated. I think of like, I wonder would Terra Loans survive today? You know what I mean? Like, as in, I'm trying to think like a sporting version of this.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
But it's interesting. I think like, when I think of culture and I think about, hospitality, it's like the reset that COVID kind of created for people. I've spoken to like, I had the head of operational excellence at say Dave and Buster's on recently, and we were chatting, and he was talking about like calling it a reset. And he was like, it wasn't like we had bad values before. It wasn't like we were like a bad place to work. It was just like that pause, that break was like, okay, who are the people we want to hire? Who are the people that we want to own? And like, how do we design that sort of ideal person so that we can now go out and get it? So as awful as that period was, it also had the inverse of like, hey, let's actually reevaluate the kind of great person that we want to hire to like lead our business going forward. Do you feel like you've had kind of similar with that since COVID? Because I know you've been there for 4 years, so you were like knee deep. Like, I mean, you joined just before COVID.
Oh my goodness! Listen, I left healthcare right before it all, developed, and I jumped into this space, and for a period we closed, so that was interesting.
Yeah,
I think the two biggest COVID observations I would give is, I'm a student of people. That's probably one of the reasons I've stayed in recruitment for so long. I'm naturally curious. I like meeting different individuals from all over, different walks of life, different backgrounds, different skill sets, and helping many along the way kind of unlock their potential. So having said that, I think from an employee standpoint, and I'm just talking about employees across America, not necessarily folks that I work with, just in general, the observation is it was a time to reset and go, what really matters?
Yeah.
And what really matters is family. And, I could go on, but I think with that, part of that, we saw the rise of, well, listen, remote work is going to be a thing, and employers, you're going to make it a thing for the safety and health and well-being of my family, or you can't have me on the payroll anymore. And remote work exploded, right? And as some companies are trying to pull back on that, employees are still going, well, hang on a minute. I've still added value. I've done great work. If you still want me on the payroll, you better not cross that line. So I think we saw a resetting of just work-life values in this country. And on the business side of that for us, oh my goodness, you talk about the value proposition for our company. We were saying, take your family and go on vacation. Don't give back your vacation days. And certainly that helped us. That was great at the sales table because people got it more. They got us. Yeah.
Was I gone?
No, they got just the value of that time away, right?
Yeah.
And how important it is to not skip that.
So what's interesting, I have two data points that I've heard recently that are fascinating to that. I saw that on Redfin that 10% of the homes in America that are for sale today are because of return to office protocols.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
as in all the people who obviously left cities, it's like, yeah, you got to come back, you know. And then it's interesting, you know, you talk about like, you know, as a sales pitch using like the use the vacation that you have. Like, I actually can't even tell you what it was like to have been in COVID in Tennessee. I wouldn't know how strict or unstrict it was. Like, say I was in California and they're pretty adhering to all the governmental protocols. But I know I've spoken to people who've had, like, say, resorts in Florida on this podcast. And two of them had mentioned to me a phrase that I'd never heard before, which was Florida fatigue, which was that they're now in a fatigue phase where basically during COVID, it was one of the only places open. And so people went on their trips to Florida to, you know, enjoy their freedom, so to speak. And now there's a bit of a fatigue for it. And I guess, like, was it how all the markets that you were operating in were pretty closed as well? I think were they there?
It really depended on the market, right?
Yeah.
Because Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Louisiana, and Tennessee are the states that I'm part of. And yes, every state was a little different.
Yeah.
I would tell you that the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, you know, certainly when COVID first hit and we were closed as an entity for several months, I've lived in the Smokies area for many, many decades, and it was like a ghost town, say in March, right, of 2020. Well, the summer months were explosive.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the biggest summer months we had ever seen in history. So, you know, I've never heard it called Tennessee fatigue because I don't know that it hit the whole state. But gosh, for the folks in the hospitality space here in the market I work in, I would feel like they would resonate that statement, or that statement would resonate with them, and a lot of the same kind of thing, because it was crazy busy.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you know, it's interesting. You know, I hear, because I speak to a lot of franchise kind of owners and like restaurants and stuff, and you know, hospitality as a sort of vacation entity, whether hotels, resorts, whatever, clubs, whatever, seems to like have a more rose-tinted glass view of that time, in a way that like restaurants obviously are like, nah, man, that wasn't us. Do you know, like like night and day difference, night and day. And you know, it's funny, like the conversation I have with people who are in restaurants, for example, you know, when we talk about, like, say, roadblocks and challenges they have are very much like staff, top of funnel. Next issue, quality staff. And then the next issue is like retaining the staff. And I guess it obviously depends on the role, because obviously you're hiring for, say, like sales and marketing folks. But I guess now, and I suppose it's part of like even one of our kind of final questions, is like that work from home balance that you were mentioning earlier. Do you offer work from home as an opportunity, but like people need to be on site? Like, how does it work in terms of like finding the right talent for you?
So nearly everything we have, at least in the part of the world I work within, is face-to-face. So there's very little work from home opportunity. Everything's face-to-face. So the challenge is finding great talent. Like I had a call set up last week, initial interview, great background, read, and this is not uncommon, read just a little bit of a blurb that I'd sent out about the opportunity, and just assumed it could be remote because didn't know our industry. No harm, no foul, right? So on a regular basis, myself, my team, and my colleagues will run into individuals that likely have a great skill set in sales, but we can't help them if they can't come into one of our preview centers to work. And it's okay, not the end of the world, right? They just have to look for a different opportunity.
Yeah, and that doesn't like impact your pipeline. Like, it sounds to me like you have a relatively healthy pipeline of candidates that you're kind of able to kind of work through, like in a way that's not like in the restaurant business where they're like, I need really good quality right now.
Well, I would say we do a couple things. One, we tend to have better retention rates than a lot of our competitors. Two, we invest a lot of time and effort and collateral and promotion with employee referrals. We know the importance of it. So we have a healthy number of our hires come through because our colleagues are referring people that they know or have met and felt like they fit our business. Now, that doesn't fill every need, of course. It may fill 40 to 50, 55% of it. And then the rest is going to come from, recruiter efforts.
Oh no, but that's actually kind of amazing, because you think about it, like, not to make it too like metric driven, but like the acquisition cost, like the investment you make versus the return you get. Like I presume, like just like in marketing, when we talk about the cost of acquisition of certain funnel stages, you could be advertising in LinkedIn for that position, or you have somebody to refer you, and it's just like a way to get that. I think, I guess one of the final questions I asked you is on that topic, because I've always find this fascinating, is because you have such a huge referral sort of program. I mean, if it's 40% of your acquisition, I mean, that's almost unheard of. I mean, it's so successful. It's actually, I don't know any other kind of businesses that have such a high figure. So that's amazing. When you try to think of like the sort of pipeline diversity, so to speak, and I'm not strictly speaking about DE&I, because everyone has an opinion of DE&I and that kind of stuff, and that's not necessarily what I'm getting at. But it's like, obviously friends refer friends, and friends look like friends, and I don't just mean like physically, I mean just mentally, and kind of appear that way. Like the remainder of your program for acquisition, that how does that work from like a sort of like, how do you feel like either different job roles or different personalities that you're looking for, a different mix, that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, I would say two things. One, friends on the surface refer friends. When it really hits a whole nother level, it's when leadership and talent acquisition start to educate the staff to say, look, from an employee referral standpoint, we're just not looking for who you know and walks, talks, and looks and everything like you. We're talking about always be a talent scout. And when you're out in the marketplace and you go into a retailer, for instance, and you have a great experience and that person sticks out, steal them. So, right. So I think part of the reason we hit a healthy percentage is on a regular basis, we're going in and building relationships from a meeting setting, talking about it in front of the whole sales and marketing team, and or on a one-on-one basis to educate the staff to say, just look for great talent. Now, the other side of the question is, what other kinds of things do we do? We have an incredible recruitment, marketing, and employment brand leader that newly created position about a year and a half ago. She has done incredible work to really emphasize that across the enterprise, raise our scores on Indeed and Glassdoor, get our presence, just blown up in the social space. That has helped a ton.
It's huge on LinkedIn.
Yep. The other side is, it's a recruiting team that acts like a sales organization and is constantly prospecting and looking for talent. So they're pressed. I'm pressed to pull in great hires as well.
I mean, that's awesome. And I mean, the employee brand is amazing, because, that's what I do when I do my research.
Oh, sure.
I mean, I was like, you guys have 26,000 followers on LinkedIn. I mean, that's an insanely huge volume that you can just tap into tomorrow for your employee brand, and it really speaks to it. And I mean, people look at that. I mean, they look at Glassdoor, for better or worse. And, these are better the devil, and the fact that like you guys are all over that, I thought was like pretty awesome. I mean, you guys are a huge organization anyway, and you employ a lot of people. But it is amazing to me to hear such a focus, and you have a dedicated person for the employee brand, because I hear that over and over and over again from people on this podcast talking about the employee brand, in particular, say like in the onboarding phase. Now, again, I speak to more people who hire, like say the hourly workers than they are responsible for sort of like more FTEs like yours. But in the sense that, like, how do they nail that onboarding? Because some of those quit, just won't show up the next day. And it's like, what, you're putting your best foot forward, your best brand forward. The fact that you have somebody dedicated, it's actually the first business I've heard on this that has actually referenced their own dedicated, like, employee brand sort of leader.
Sure. Well, listen, she's fabulous. I'd be remiss if I didn't point that out. And, it's so important. And the backstory there is she grew from a recruiter role and understood the importance, and also understood the fact that, the talent acquisition organization itself can't just kind of manage that. There's got to be, a dedicated person and or department, because it's more than full-time work, I guess is what I would say. So.
Oh, totally. I mean, you're responsible for acquiring that sort of talent, like at the top of the funnel, and you're trying to get them into that role. And
Right.
then, but like, if they all left on day one, like what good is all the work you're doing to
Right.
acquire talent to come into the business? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and
game
that's
over.
where the
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like, sorry, but that's like where the brand really kind of like matters. And I think, like, again, to your point, I mean, there's been a sort of reawakening and a reimagining in hospitality that like the brand really matters. I think the competition for talent from everywhere is just so extreme across like management, leadership, across obviously, front of house staff, all the kind of the whole gamut is like a war for talent. Like to the point you're making, you're saying if you see somebody really good who's like good retail experience, it's like that person could potentially be with us. So
Right.
that's the level of thinking that's required in this sort of, I hate phrasing it as a battle or a war for talent because it sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? But I mean,
I think it has been the whole time I've worked in
yeah,
recruiting for 26 years, and I don't see it changing.